So welcome to What's Rising. It's such a pleasure to do these, to notice what's arising within me from week to week, and then finding an avenue to share it with whoever might show up. So listening to the invitation within myself in terms of what's arising, inviting you to explore what's arising within you, within the world, within the relationships that you're in, and hopefully through an exploration of what's arising, come into more love and peace with ourselves and gain some insight into this arising. The topic today is an extension of what's arising, and it's what is true, or is this true, from what's arising. So whatever is arising, what is true here? Is this true? If somebody from the outside world says something, we can question what's true here, or is that true, and really discern that for ourselves in this age of misinformation, of propaganda, of censoring, and of course that's always been going on. It's hard to trust and find circles or people that we can truly trust, that they are questioning what's true before they even share it, or it's offered and we can discern together what's true. So I'm going to dive deeper into this topic because of this world of distrust, misinformation, disinformation, which is only going to get worse through the capabilities of AI. Discerning what is true is of ultimate importance. And part of that is discerning story, which I'll talk about later. So before I get into that, as always, I'm going to invite you into the space of just reflecting on what's arising for you internally within yourself, maybe what comes in the forms of images or senses or feelings. Just get connected and present with yourself and what's arising from outside of the world. Notice, let go. Maybe it comes, there's a charge there, fuel for you to investigate further, and maybe this podcast on what is true might help you focus in on those things that are arising which are disturbing for you. In any event, I invite you to get present with 3 rings of my bowl. So a few weeks ago, a friend of mine and I were talking about kind of open questions to explore. And we dipped into the energy behind the question, what's arising, as an example, or what are you noticing, or what's here, so that we can be in the present moment. And with what's arising, there's almost this emergence, this becoming, and this movement in what's arising. And I think that's why I chose that for the title of my podcast way back, is just this noticing what's coming up for you, and noticing both internally, your thoughts, your feelings, your senses, the images, and what's arising in the outer world, what's bombarding you from the news or relationships, or something that is coming in as present that you can sometimes focus on or let go. So it's an opportunity to drop into something that is arising. So I think it's a powerful question, awareness kind of question, and it's very similar to what are you noticing, or what's here, which is maybe even broader, all the things that's here, or it could be focused, zooming in and zooming out on these questions. So this what's arising, I think, is a powerful question, but there's a secondary question that we were exploring a little bit, and I have been, and that is, what is true, or is this true? There's a sense for me that if something is arising into my awareness, that there's a realness. That's another question. What is real? Is this real? But there's a realness to that. It's something might arise for me and no one else might see it. They might even consider it an illusion. It could be a vision that comes in and it's not real. And it may not be true for someone else, but if it's arising for me in my awareness, there's a trueness to it. It's like, there's a ground. This is true, that it arose. The challenge is, and the opportunity is what's the story behind what's arising? The mind tends to create a story about what is there. So what's arising, and the mind already has a story that goes right back to childhood and traumas and beliefs and things, and it just folds into that, and naturally this is the story behind that. Someone says something and we totally agree because that's the story, or we revolt because we have a story, and the mind making meaning about what is arising. So it's a story. In some ways, it's a fantasy. It's not actually real. It's a story we made up about our reality. So questioning the story that the mind is making up, and everything seems to be a story in our life if we think about it. We've been bombarded and conditioned from a childhood about the way things are and the way things should be, and largely accepted that story or revolted against that story and created our own story about that particular happening that happened in our lives. And then we get into these patterns. So if we're looking at external narratives about, which is another story from the media or alternative media or the groups we're in, maybe we're in a group where everybody is of the same values and energy, and maybe even caught in a nice story and a worldview that is useful, but it may not be entirely true, that it's a story. Money, the whole idea of money is a story. There is so much power in story itself. I think that we are amazing beings as human beings because we are storytellers. We create meaning out of pretty much everything. And the power of story, if we can imagine something, create a story about something we want to bring in the future, and live into that story, then it seems to get created in our reality. But where we have challenges is when we create stories and get caught in our story. So there is power of creation in story, and there's also imprisonment in story. Those stories that have locked us in to a worldview. Those stories have belief systems involved, worldviews involved. They have shadow. They might be coming from our trauma, our hurt, and our pain, and a separation of self. They might be coming from blame and judgment and opinion, are some of the symptoms of that. And those opinions and beliefs and stories about others are made up. They're not necessarily true, or they could be true, but if we're firm and confirm that that's a story, and we don't move into curiosity about, so when you said that word, what did you mean? And explore this story rather than project your story onto them and say, when they did that, they had the intent to hurt me. Maybe that was true, but maybe not. Maybe they just said a word and it rubbed against something in my own pattern and story from childhood, which causes me my mind, my body to react, feel hurt, feel angry, and everything else. Much of our reality and our perception of reality is locked into various stories that block us, keep us stuck, cause suffering and pain. So I invite you to, as I do, and sometimes not aware, but become aware of the stories that we have created in our life. Become aware of the story in the moment when something's arising, being able to ask, is this true? What the story that I make up about that might be true, that someone says something to you. Don't argue with that. They said it. Sometimes we even misinterpret or mishear people, and so we put words into somebody's mouth that they didn't say. That's part of a deeper story and trauma often, because we see the world through our story and filter things out according to our story and our belief system. So we actually mishear. But say someone actually says something, what's the story putting onto them the intent is again another story. If we can open up as individuals to look at the story and ask, what's true here? Is my story true? Noting that they have a story and conditioning, and they're coming from a story. So maybe from examining and opening up to say, what's their story here? Be curious about it. Examine it. Maybe ask some questions if we have a chance. What is their need behind that story? What's their trauma? What's their concern? What's their fear behind the story? Because they will have a story. Other people have a story just like we have a story. And if we let go of our story about their story, our story about our story, and come to a much cleaner space, there's much more freedom and much more power. Because then we're consciously creating story for some purpose that is helpful and in service to humanity. And what if we could have this childlike showing up in the world of no belief, no story, just an open heart and open mind in exploration and discovery and connection with life and fascination and wonder of life without the backstory? What if we could show up in the present, in the now, without all of the mind and past destroying what is here and alive right now? That's hard to do. That's a process. It's a process I've been in for, I guess, all my life. And I guess there's even stories, as I'm in the practice of letting go of stories, my mind is creating new ones that I'm not aware of. So asking within what's arising of especially around if we're charged, noticing where we have opinion and judgment and projection onto others, or a story about ourselves, not good enough story inside, going a little deeper. Is this true? or what is true here, and discerning that. This is going to be such an important skill. Always has been an important skill, but with the world that seems to be emerging in the collective of more propaganda, more censorship of certain views, more narrowing, herding into certain biases by our the algorithms within Google or whatever. So you start looking at some story around some conspiracy theory and another one, and then the algorithms will take you down the rabbit hole, and you'll end up getting what you're interested in, and you could get caught in a story, a group, a tribe. As you're looking for belonging, you might slip into the paranoia of that story. So whatever rabbit hole you go down, examine the story that's unfolding. Watch yourself. Is this true? What am I accepting as true or not? And rather than going down just one storyline, looking at multiple perspectives is another important skill. Opening your mind to, okay, so they seem to have a story there. Exploring that, being curious about it without getting caught. Is this true? Yeah, it seems to be true. Great, it's useful for me, that story, maybe right now. So exploring that with an open mind, open heart, exploring what charges you have against some of that story too, or this story and that story, and getting a more whole perspective of what's going on before you move into any conclusions about. And the mind wants to make a conclusion about the story, that this is true and that's false. But what I've found is there's a little bit of truth in all of those. There's a little bit of story within me as I'm examining what's there. So I'll think that is true because it's a story in me, and that story in me might be coming from a open-hearted space, or might even be coming from a shadow that I'm not aware of. So I attach myself to that story, which is really not true. It's true because there's something in me that wants that to be true. And so I gravitate to a storyline that is maybe not even healthy or not open. And it could be good and healthy for now. But holding our stories lightly if we're creating them. And then even moving into the power of story of, okay, if this is the story out there, what is a new story with my heart and mind and energy and purpose? How can I serve in the creation of a new story, a new myth, a new unfolding for humanity? What's my role in the new story? And taking responsibility for how you can create and co-create in the story of life to make it a better place for all. So this practice of emptying the mind of stories that are no longer useful, becoming aware of them, and then creating new stories for humanity. Humanity is going down this path for a long time now, and maybe going deeper into a story of materialism and technology, and everything is about happiness happens on the outside. Is that story useful for you, and for how long? Because for me, my story is, I don't think I can find happiness there. I can find some level of happiness, having some money and some freedom on the outside. There's things there that are helpful to be comfortable in life. But how much is enough out there? And turning inward and creating a new story inward, and letting go and surrendering and forgiving all those stories we created, even about happiness being out there, and reconnecting with ourselves and a different story within. In 2024, in the coming year, I hope to look a lot at the stories that are happening out there in the media, in the news, various things, maybe Trump or maybe the wars or something like this. And with that as a reflection of me or us, examine the stories that are projected onto various peoples out there, or we project onto them, and taking that story inside and say, what's happening for you personally or me personally? What stories am I making up? And what are alternative stories? Diving in with compassion and empathy for what the story might be from that person. What do they want to believe? Especially the charge, the triggers that happen when we hear somebody's stories. That's where some of the real opportunity is. We know we've made up a story, that we're caught in the story, we're caught in the drama if we have a charge. And that's the low-hanging fruit. I'm upset because of what they said. I'm upset because of what, noticing what I felt. I'm angry. And then examining the story around why I'm angry about what's emerging inside or outside, and then going deeper, not staying on the surface, going deeper to the root of the story, and often recreating a story based on forgiveness and love and opening our hearts is useful, versus getting caught in the story. Sometimes it's even eliminating the story entirely. So that's what I hope to do in the upcoming podcast, really examine, shadow quite a bit in terms of world events. There might be other things that arise in me from time to time. I want to be really open and free with what's emerging from week to week, and I really hope you enjoy that and find some insights as I look at the stories and narratives and question about whether that's true, inviting each of us, is that true? And hopefully out of that we get some insight. And as I speak in these podcasts, I invite you to examine and ask, Richard said this, is that true? Is that true for me? What else is true? How does what's arising in you relate to what's arising in me, and what's in between in terms of that relationship, that exchange? There could be insight there in asking what is true. Is this true from many, many levels? Inviting you always to go deeper and challenge those misrepresentations of truth that are arising all the time, and choosing your story. So that's it for now. If you like my podcasts, or you find this one useful, please like. If you haven't subscribed, please subscribe, comment, share your stories, what's true, what's not true, of what's coming up and arising for you, and share the podcast with others if you think it's useful for others. I get joy just from doing it in a large sense, as I watch myself in this unfolding of the podcasts, and maybe even in the future look back and say, it looks like I said that, and that was what was true for me in the past, but it's no longer true. What's true now? What's true now? This open invitation to step into any relationship you have and let go of the story. See everybody and everything from fresh eyes, with open, loving heart and mind, to say, what's here? Playing in the curiosity and wonder of life. Hope to see you next time.